Manuscript painting is an important art form during the Byzantine period, which also will lead us into icon painting, which we'll see as a very important pictorial tradition that starts with Byzantine art. I'm showing you here the Vienna Genesis, which is the oldest painted manuscript. It was made in the early 6th century. It was the product of a Constantinople or maybe a Syrian workshop, and it's using very precious materials. And when we think about books from our own reference, we tend not to think of them as particularly valuable. They're made from paper and they're printed. If they're published, they probably are in editions of several hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands. And they're very accessible in terms of their pricing. Maybe not your textbooks, but you could certainly pick up a novel or a used novel for not that much money. But at this point, manuscripts are extremely valuable and a luxury good. The printing press had not been invented yet, so we're looking at absolutely one-of-a-kind objects. But the materials themselves are very precious. It's not printed on calfskin, on paper, but rather on calfskin, which is, we could also call that vellum. It's dyed purple, and the letters themselves were written in silver ink. And although what we're looking at is oxidized silver, so it doesn't look like it's silver anymore, it looks like it's black or gray. But it is, the words themselves are actually in a precious material. The subject goes back to the first book of the Bible, the Genesis. And this one, Rebecca and Eliezer at the well, tells the story of when Isaac, Abraham's son, who was 40 years old at this time, his parents sent their servant Eliezer to find a wife for him. And he chose Rebecca because when he met her at the well, she helped him get water for himself and his camels. You'll notice that the page itself is divided into text and image. There's not a lot of attempt to reconcile the text with the image. We can assume that the image itself is being narrated by the text that we see above. So let's look at how the story is told pictorially. There are two different episodes that are told within the same image. First, she is leaving the city of Nador to get water, and we see this little walled city here. So she walks along a road, and you'll notice that we have some columns, and she is following along this little path. The columns very conveniently have us turn a corner. So she moves this way, she's holding her jug, and she walks along the path. And then she meets Eliezer at the well, right here. So we have the same figure in the same dress to show us two different moments in the story. This is very Roman. Meanwhile, she meets this little figure who is a recumbent nude holding a jug of water. This is not a person, but rather a personification of a river. And we might think of it as a little out of place to have a Roman nude in a religious text. But again, this is very Roman. It is a holdover from a Roman tradition. Then we see her when she stops at the well and meets Isaac. She is bending over to give him water and watering the camels. You'll notice that the camels are kind of all layered to give us the sense of a little bit of depth. This one is shaded a little bit to give us, again, some differentiation of one camel to another, but it's all rather flat. So what we have here in the artist of the Vienna Genesis is an artist that seems to be caught between two artistic traditions. One that recognizes some vestiges of a Roman past, and we see that again with these columns and this narration system of showing us all of these different moments, and of course the Roman nude, and a little bit of an emphasis on the body underneath the drapery, and a wanting to show us a little bit of depth with the stacking of these animals. But then a new artistic tradition that is only interested in educating through through narrative art. It has to be clear, it has to be narrative, and you need to be able to read it almost like a book so that those that are not literate could understand the story without reading the texts. And even though this was an object that probably would have been meant for someone elite, you still could not assume literacy. Here's a comparison of that nude figure in the Vienna Genesis versus a Roman statue that would be a personification of a river or a river god. And you can see that the artist here understands the symbolism here and wants to show a river using that symbolism, but it's very flattened and very didactic. The figure there is just to reference water, and in fact is, a very strange indication of a pagan god within a Christian text. But there is again that holdover and that communication from a Roman past. Here's another page from the Vienna Genesis, the story of Jacob wrestling an angel. As with the page of Eliezer at the well, we see that the space of the text and the pictorial space are very strictly divided. Also, like the previous page, you'll notice that different moments are depicted in this story in a way to make the story very clear. And the narrative is privileged over figures and forms that are believable or realistic or naturalistic. The story that depicts is from Genesis 32, in which Jacob spends the night alone on a riverside and encounters a man who proceeds to wrestle with him until daybreak. In the end, Jacob is given the name Israel by the man, and the man, who is actually an angel, refuses to give his own name. It starts the story when Jacob is with his wives and his servants and his 11 children, and they are proceeding over a bridge. So that's what we're seeing here. And then when he encounters the angel, he is by himself. So his whole sort of entourage has passed on without him, but this is a moment in which he is by himself wrestling the angel. As with the previous page as well, we see some references to Roman pictorialism. You'll see this bridge that allows us the narrative to turn the corner and move back in the opposite direction, has arches and columns, a reference to the Roman past. Many of the figures beneath, we see lots of drapery, which shows us a bit of the anatomy underneath. The artist of this time wasn't interested, though, in a realistic, consistent representation of space, but was more satisfied with symbolic representations that we see here. The folds of the cloth are simplified and reduced, and the figures seem to be almost cartoon-like than portraits of actual people. But at the same time, we can recognize the most important figures. Here we see the angel, we see the angel again, and Jacob, who kind of follows throughout the scene. As I mentioned before, manuscript paintings are one tradition of painting during the Byzantine era, and the other one is icon painting. This becomes a very important tradition in medieval art and begins in the in Byzantium, in the eastern part of the empire. Icon in Greek means image, and it comes to mean an image representing a sacred figure or an event in the Byzantine Church. And these objects, these painted objects, are believed to have the power to transmit a message to God. So it's kind of an image that you would pray to as an intermediary to allow you to have communication with God, or in some cases, a saint, a particular saint, or the Virgin Mary, or Christ. The word icon in Greek means image, and these were very portable images. And they go back to the 4th century, and as I said, they become a way of having a spiritual transaction almost with holy figures. You'll notice that it is made from encaustic on wood. So this is a wood panel. Encaustic, as you might remember, is pigment suspended in wax. So it's a very opaque painting. It's a very waxy, almost like a paste-like painting on wood. And you'll notice that it is also, this one is very small. It's about 2 feet high and 1 feet and 1.5 feet wide, which means it's very portable. It can be put on an altar, but it also, it really begs a very intimate viewing. It is meant for, again, this spiritual transaction. It's meant to be an inspiration to prayer. You can imagine that this practice of praying straight to an image is a little bit problematic when trying to reconcile the rules of the 2nd commandment. Idolatry is the worship of images, and it is again forbidden by that 2nd commandment. And it becomes a problem during a period in which Emperor Leo III launches an iconoclasm. And this word, again, from the Greek, means literally breaking the image. Icon meaning image, and klasm meaning breaking. This was a period in which the Byzantine Empire was under attack. It lost almost 2/3 of its territory, and this was a catastrophic loss. And the shock of these events led Emperor Leo III to think that God was punishing Christians for the worship of idols. And this is why he banned picturing the divine. And this was a way to, again, assert the authority of the state over the church, but also stop the power and spread of some of the monasteries who were becoming more and more powerful. These were the places, these were the artistic centers where manuscripts and icons were being made. So we actually have very few images or icons that exist from this period, but this is one of the few that survive. The icon shows the Virgin and Child flanked by 2 soldier saints, Saint Theodore to the left and Saint George to the right. These were saints that reportedly slayed the dragon, and the dragon symbolizes paganism, but it also symbolizes the devil. Behind them are 2 angels that gaze upwards towards the hand of God, which is kind of hard to see here, but the hand of God is coming down from above. And it shows, again, how this image becomes the intermediary between the faithful and the worshipped. Like with the Vienna Genesis, we see the painter selectively using a classicizing style inherited from Rome. Some of the faces are modeled, particularly the Virgin Mary here with the shading under her chin. But for the most part, the figures are long and flat and elongated and not meant to show depth or modeling or three dimensions.